Welcome to the Adventure High podcast, where we get you high on adventure.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Deep Dive. Today, we're going to take you back in time, back to 1932. To the Himalayas.
To the Himalayas.
For a really fascinating look at a German-American expedition.
That's right.
To Nanga Parbat.
To Nanga Parbat.
And we're going to be using Elizabeth Knowlton's book about this expedition to kind of guide us as we look at the relationship between the European climbers and the local porters that they hired.
Exactly. Yeah, and it's a story, set during a period of a lot of political and social change.
Oh, yeah.
And unrest.
So first, can you kind of set the scene for us a little bit? Like, what was going on in the world in 1932?
What is 1932? So we're kind of in the peak of the Great Depression.
Yeah.
And Nanga Parbat is the 9th highest mountain in the world. So that's our setting.
Okay, and this expedition led by Lily Merkel was really underfunded.
Yeah, definitely. That definitely played a big role in the decisions they made. So basically when it came to hiring the porters.
Mm-hmm.
So, normally they would have hired more experienced Sherpa and Tibetan porters from, like, Darjeeling.
Oh.
But they opted for local porters because they were cheaper.
So they're already starting to cut corners.
Yeah.
And we're not even at base camp yet.
Right. Yeah.
But I have a feeling it's probably about more than just money.
Yeah, you're right. It's 1932. You got to remember that the, fight for independence in India is gaining steam.
Right.
And the region is very much affected by this kind of rising nationalist sentiment that's challenging this British rule.
So it's a lot more, it sounds like, than just, saving some money.
Yeah, you're right. It's definitely more than that. It's a decision that would have very significant consequences.
Okay. So tell me, when these European climbers and these local porters all meet up, what happens? What's the dynamic like?
Well, right away, there are clashes. So the Kashmiri cooks and servants just refused to carry loads.
Okay.
Arguing they were only hired to cook and serve.
Okay. That makes sense to me.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
The foreman of this group was Abdul Pat.
Okay.
And Knowlton describes him as being really like a strong advocate for the workers.
Uh-huh.
But she uses this term, she calls it native Bolshevism to describe it. And it gives you a little bit of insight into how the colonial mindset was at the time.
So are you saying that these porters are like actually aligned with like the communist?
Not necessarily, but, they're definitely aware of what's going on in the region, especially with like the Red Shirts, which is this nonviolent resistance movement led by Abdul Ghaffar Khan in the nearby Northwest Frontier Province.
Right.
And they're fighting for their rights and their dignity.
Right.
And that's definitely impacting these porters and their interactions with these European climbers.
So they're already kind of pushing back a little bit?
Totally.
Before the expedition even gets going?
Yeah.
So what happens next? I mean, they need these porters.
They need them.
What do they do?
So they turn to the British liaison officer, Lieutenant Fryer.
Okay.
And he leverages his authority to pressure the local ruler, the Nahim Tehsildar of Astor, to provide porters for the expedition.
So they're basically being forced into this. These aren't...
Exactly. Not a group of eager adventurers. Right. These are just laborers.
Yeah.
Pressured into carrying heavy loads.
For these Europeans.
Yeah.
Up at this dangerous mountain that they probably don't even want to be on.
No. And, the Astories had their own reasons to be wary of this mountain.
Oh, okay.
So back in 1895, there was this British climber named Albert Mummery, tried to climb Nanga Parbat, and disappeared with 2 Gurkha companions.
And they never found the bodies?
Never found them.
And so the locals kind of attributed that to...
Yeah, they believed that there were supernatural forces up there.
And that if they disturbed those forces, bad things would happen.
Exactly.
So they're really caught between a rock and a hard place here.
Totally. It's a no-win situation for them. So the expedition, faced with all of that, decides to bring in this new group of porters.
Okay.
From Hunza.
The Hunza porters.
The Hunza porters, yeah.
They're a big part of this story.
They are a big part of this story.
Yeah.
They bring them in. Initially, they seem perfect.
Okay.
Knowlton describes them as, like, hearty and cheerful, seemingly unaffected by all this political stuff.
But I bet that didn't last long.
It did not, no.
What happened? What was, like, the first sign of trouble?
Food.
Food.
Believe it or not, it all started with food.
Okay.
So they gave the porters rice.
Oh, okay.
Which is just, it was completely foreign to their diet.
Right.
And they wanted chapatis, which is their traditional food made with wheat flour.
Right.
And they were going to get them.
I don't blame them.
Yeah.
Like if you're hauling stuff up a mountain and you're not even getting your food.
Yeah, exactly.
That you're used to.
Yeah. So what did they do?
So they staged this amazing protest. Like these Hunza porters just sat down in a circle in the middle of all these tents.
Wow.
Held speeches for days.
Really?
Yeah, it was like they were mirroring those political demonstrations.
Wow.
That were happening all over the country. They knew their worth.
Yeah.
And they weren't afraid to fight for it.
So this is like way more than just about climbing a mountain.
Absolutely. This is like
what is it about?
The clash of culture.
Dignity, like all this stuff is wrapped up in this.
It is, and we're just scratching the surface.
So they're protesting. They want these chapatis.
Yeah.
Did they get them?
They did. They did. One of the climbers, Fritz Wiesner, was a little bit more pragmatic, I think, than the others.
Okay.
And realized they needed to find a solution.
So they actually doubled the flour rations for the Hunza porters.
It's a small victory for the porters, but I got a feeling this expedition's got another curveball.
Oh, yeah.
Coming their way.
Absolutely.
What's next?
So remember how they're already underfunded?
Yeah.
Turns out a lot of their high altitude gear, the stuff that was supposed to help these porters survive, had been stolen.
Stolen? What?
Stolen.
Seriously?
Yeah.
So what did they do?
So they had to improvise.
Okay.
They set up this whole system of sharing gear, taking turns, using it as they climbed.
I can't imagine that went over well.
No, it didn't. It really, these porters were already worried about their safety and their compensation.
Right.
And this gear situation just amplified all of that.
Yeah. Yeah, it just feels like another broken promise.
Yeah, like their well-being's just not a priority.
Right. So we got, food issues, gear issues. And then you mentioned earlier the Storylists are afraid of Nanga Parbat. Like, what was the deal with that?
So in 1895, Albert Mummery, who was this British climber, he tried to climb Nanga Parbat.
Yeah.
And he vanished. With his 2 Gurkha companions.
And they never found the bodies.
Never found them.
So the locals kind of attributed that to
those supernatural forces they believed were up there.
And so it's like they're being forced to go up this mountain that they're terrified of.
Pretty much.
And then on top of that, the expedition's treating them.
Exactly. It was a very tense atmosphere.
Okay. So tensions are high. What happens next?
All right. So imagine you're a porter, right? You're up on this mountain. You're freezing cold.
Yeah.
You're exhausted.
Yeah.
You're carrying all this heavy stuff.
Right.
You're sharing gear. You haven't had a decent meal in days.
Right.
And suddenly, an avalanche roars down the mountain.
Oh, wow.
And nearly buries.
Yeah.
Several climbers and porters at Camp 1.
Oh, that's terrifying.
Terrifying.
I mean, can you imagine?
It was a breaking point for a lot of the porters.
Yeah. I bet.
So after that, the issues with the food, the gear, the demanding work, the near-death experience, they just try and leave.
Okay, but I mean, they're kind of stuck, right?
They are stuck. Lieutenant Fryer, that British liaison officer, threatens to report them to the Mir of Hunza, their ruler, if they leave.
So they're really between a rock and a hard place.
It was a no-win situation.
Yeah, it's just such a clear example of these power dynamics, right?
Absolutely.
It seems like these climbers are so focused on their own goal that they're not even thinking about what these porters are going through.
It's a very real illustration of that, yeah.
So the expedition continues.
It does.
After Algo.
Despite all the challenges. They face slow progress, harsh weather, a lot of frustration. And, Knowlton, she talks about these lavish meals for the Europeans and the basic rations for the porters.
So even after everything they've been through, the inequality's still there.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And here's where it gets really interesting, right?
Okay.
Knowlton, she says that the Hunza porters were almost as sensitive to hardship as Europeans and no stronger than the sahibs in load carrying.
Oh. That's pretty...
Yeah, it kind of reveals this contradiction in their expectations.
So they want to believe that they're, like, superhuman,
right,
but also somehow inferior to them at the same time.
It's really fascinating, actually. It just highlights...
They just can't.
It's fascinating. It just highlights the biases.
Yeah. It doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
It's amazing how this expedition to climb a mountain is really about so much more.
It's about so much more.
It's about all these cultural misunderstandings and these power dynamics.
Absolutely. And, as we'll see, all of that just intensifies as we reach the climax of the expedition.
So what happens in that final push for the summit?
Well, driven by their ambition, the climbers make this last-ditch effort to reach the top of Nanga Parbat.
Okay.
And they're pushing themselves and these porters to the limit.
Yeah.
Yeah, imagine you're one of these porters, right?
Right.
You're exhausted, you're hungry, you're probably dealing with altitude sickness.
Yeah.
And you're still expected to, carry these heavy loads.
Right.
Support the climber's dream.
Yeah, it's unimaginable, the physical and mental strain that they're going through.
Totally.
Do they make it?
No.
No, they don't.
So the expedition fails.
It fails. The expedition fails. And to make matters worse, the climbers actually blame the porters for their failure.
Oh, come on. Seriously?
Yeah.
After everything they've been through.
They said it was, because they lacked strength and commitment.
It's just, it's unbelievable.
It's like a refusal to just to see their own role in the situation.
And they're just scapegoating the people that are already...
Totally. They're scapegoating the most vulnerable people.
That are the most vulnerable. Yeah.
They completely overlooked the fact that, it was their decisions that led to a lot of these problems.
Right. Like underestimating the food and the gear.
The food, the gear, yeah. Pushing these porters.
Pushing them too hard.
Beyond their limits.
But even beyond that, it's like they're failing to recognize just the incredible courage and resilience that these porters have shown.
Yeah, absolutely.
Throughout this whole ordeal. I mean, they faced incredible hardships.
Yeah.
From the terrain, to the avalanche.
The avalanches.
The cultural clashes. The cultural clashes, The power imbalance.
The power imbalances. It's just...
Yeah, they faced it all.
It makes you wonder if they even saw the porters as...
Right.
As people.
Like individuals.
With their own, hopes and dreams.
Did they actually see them as human beings?
This whole story's really kind of changed my perspective on these expeditions. It's easy to get caught up in the romantic...
Yeah, the romanticized narrative.
The adventure, the conquest. But, we often forget about the
human cost.
The human cost.
Yeah.
So I guess what I'm taking away from this is that this story of this expedition in 1932 is so much more than just climbing a mountain.
Absolutely. It's a powerful lens through which we can examine these power dynamics, these cultural misunderstandings, and the social inequalities that were really prevalent at the time.
It just makes you think about whose stories get told.
Yeah, whose voices are silenced.
Yeah.
Whose voices are just forgotten.
Yeah.
It's a good reminder, even today, these issues, power, representation, ethical responsibility, they're all relevant. Whether we're talking about climbing mountains or just interacting with other people.
Traveling, So as we kind of wrap up this deep dive, what would you say is the most important thing for the listener to take away from this?
Well, I'd say the story of the 1932 Nanga Parbat expedition is this powerful reminder that we need to see the world through different perspectives. To challenge our own assumptions. And to approach everything we do, whether it's climbing a mountain or just interacting with others, with humility, with respect, and a real understanding of just the complexities of history and the social forces at play.
Well said. It's a good reminder that adventure is about so much more than conquering a mountain. It's also about conquering our own biases and
limitations. Absolutely.
Well, thanks for joining us today. And we'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.
This is the Adventure High podcast, where we get you high on adventure.